I went to a special arts school for young people when I was 12, where I did art and design and that sort of thing. And then I went to the Birmingham College of Art, where I was taught how to paint. And then I went from there to the Royal College of Art, where they taught me how not to paint. And after that, I started to paint by myself. I know the first things that I saw were drawings. And I was dancing down the street because I'd made some money from my paintings, that's all.
We all came out of the 50s in quite an academic training. I met Peter first when he and I both started at the Royal College of Art in the same year, same week. One gravitated towards people who often had similar interests.
My dad grew up in Birmingham, England, very modest lifestyle. My grandpa, my granddad was a carpenter, and my nana worked in a Cadbury's chocolate factory.
I come from a working class family, and that was all I could do, was paint. So I mean, I was relatively talented. I mean, not particularly so. There was many guys who were better than I was, and girls too, to be honest.
This is a functional sculpture. It's a coal box. The group of artists all in the same class at that time was Kitai, David Hockney, Peter Phillips, Derek Bosher, Frank Bowling and myself.
What I do remember was the first day at the college when Peter walking in with this, must have been a 6-foot square, it could have been bigger or smaller, but I mean, to me it was an unimaginable size. And his precocity just left me dry-mouthed. I thought it was incredible.
The Royal College of Art was just fantastic because there was lots of students from all over the country and other countries too.
You know, it was like a new life. You know, we were from the provinces. We got into a rather prestigious college.
The teachers are sometimes a help, sometimes not a help, because they've been brought up in another generation. I mean, they thought that artists painted landscapes and portraits. I mean, the standard procedure. And I was painting cars and pin-up girls, which wasn't standard procedure. And the staff at the school, the painters who were teaching, they had a hard time dealing with that sort of stuff. And so they didn't like you being different, and they didn't understand. I mean, what my professor said, "I hate you, Phillips." And then I got thrown out, because they're the professors, they know how to paint. You don't, you're just a bum from Birmingham. You can't have a brain, you can't do something different. They gave me a provisional pass. And so I painted at home.
I would really consider Peter sort of a rebel within the art world. You know, much like a lot of artists, it was really him pushing the boundaries early on.
I'm a sneaky guy, you know. You have to do what you have to do to stay alive, you know. Yeah, but that was the time. That was the time. That was the time of rebellion.
The one thing that Royal College started very well at that time was they had very, very good art college parties. I mean, I think at one time they could have, even before the Rolling Stones were going, they played.
And I mean, this was our area. This used to be the bar for all the guys from the School of Art up the road. So they come in here of a night and drink 8 pints of beer and stagger out, roll on the street. I even threw up on Bond Street and lay in the gutter.
At one time, we arrived at this party for the dance, and all of a sudden, a group of Slade students said, "Look out, there's those pop art boys, let's get them." And there was a fight.
A Welsh artist punched me in the face because he couldn't stand me, because he couldn't understand what I was doing. And I didn't care. I mean, I didn't punch him back, but that was it.
The reason it stopped almost immediately is Peter had a big nosebleed.
There was a lot of, when you're young, you get this sort of vibe. There's people who have their points of view, and you have your point of view, and you have to be consequent with your point of view if you're going to do it, as far as my mind goes.
The Young Contemporaries was a student exhibition held annually, which was the first opportunity for a student to show in a West End professional environment. Yeah. Peter was the president of the Young Contemporaries and I was the secretary, and it rotated between the major London colleges who ran the exhibition program.
That's what it was, a survey of student painting, sculpture and graphic arts. That's what the Young Contemporaries was. And there's the executive committee, me. Peter Phillips, president, Alan Jones, secretary.
It was Peter and Alan Jones who were responsible for the hanging of the show.
They'd have a committee of people who would say this one, this one, this one. And you'd usually choose a committee of people who were familiar with art or important in the art world if you could get them.
And they hung the show, hundreds and hundreds, of paintings. And they hung them according to, subject matter and what they looked like color-wise and, the way that a lot of people would hang a show.
Peter and I looked at each other and looked around the rooms, and it just looked like a sketch club.
Lawrence Alloway was a guy who was a curator who was at Institute of Contemporary Art in London.
Alloway, he knew about the New York scene. And the idea of having someone there looking at the work and talking about it in the context of, last month in New York, and he was mentioning these names one I'd never heard of, which would be Jasper Johns or Rosenquist and so on.
Anyway, his suggestion was that we hung the work together because it's such a mishmash of landscapes and sort of funky paintings. And so we hung it together and it made a wall of particular paintings that became, and it was pretty good.
There was never a manifesto.
And we were just doing something different, and there was a group of us, so therefore it was a little bit more encouraging that there was other people who weren't sort of banging you on the head saying, this is not art, this is art. And we was non-aggressive basically. We just went on and did it.
That meant that all the Royal College people were shown together. Peter, Hockney, Pauline, Peter, and Alan Jones and myself were all shown together. And that was probably the premier exhibition that set off the Royal College of Art, pop art, being identified as one of the important seminal moments in British pop art.
It's Birmingham.
I thought Birmingham was factories. Are these all factories?
No, it's a farm. We had farms too,
Do you think you inherited your talent from Granddad since he was a carpenter?
He was a builder and carpenter.
One thing we all had in common, that we were all working class kids.
The way I was developing was I was painting what I knew about more than what other people were painting. And that was rather mundane imagery for a lot of people. But I thought, why not? It's what I'm familiar with, and one should work with what one's familiar with.
Peter was very much an artist who was taking these everyday images from advertisements or articles or pin-up calendars and reappropriating them into his work.
I had these little special shops, so I bought a few. Inspiration.
Mm-hmm. We were interested in popular culture. We often had academic trainings, but what we were interested in is pop music, girls, boys, films, everything, and that's what we painted. We painted what we really liked.
This is like living in Girls Town. This picture's called the Girly Door. I've also done a door of the young Frank Sinatra.
It started in the mid-50s with Johns and Rauschenberg, with the ICA in London, and with me at the Royal College, about equally, in kind of 55. And then the second wave of it came at the end of the 50s. Peter Phillips was at the Royal College from 59 to 61.
it was before we thought of that we were part of any kind of movement.
I must say it was kind of a reaction from against abstract art, I think.
Well, other people got interested in because it was standard imagery that wasn't really accepted in the art world.
Pop art was a real pushback at the establishment. It was something that was young, it was fun, it was adventurous.
It was sort of popular with the normal people. They could understand what you're painting. They didn't have to go through a lecture on what it all is about.
Well, it was also related to things socially. You know, the Second World War ended in 45. At the Royal College, we were the year of 59 to 62.
And Peter was really at that sort of, that forefront of it.
I remember his paintings as being incredibly craftful. He included a lot of mechanical things.
But I didn't think about it that much because I was used to that. That's all that I knew. So in other words, I was pretty ignorant about art. And that was a good thing in a sense.
I think Peter's paintings were one of the most pop art of all pop art painters.
It's something that I did, so everybody else calls me that. I don't mind. I do what I do anyway, regardless. And that attracted other people to join in the club, so to speak, of dealing with the imagery that they should be familiar with, but didn't think of it as being art or could be art. And that's how it turned out, and I painted what I wanted to paint, more or less, and it got more and more complicated as I became more and more competent.
We were lucky to be in the right place at the right time and contributing to it, really. Probably I knew him best of all through things that the Royal College did, like Peter was I think Peter was very involved, as we all were, with the Film Society. There was a very, very good Film Society.
Which was just a department that started up, and Ridley Scott was there and other people.
But probably I got to know him best during the filming of Ken Russell's film Pop Goes the Easel.
Which also featured Peter Blake, Derek Bauchier and Pauline Botti.
Our programme tonight consists of one single film that we've made about 4 young artists. Peter Phillips is the youngest of them. He's 22 and still a student at the Royal College of Art. His father is a carpenter and he comes from Birmingham.
The film came about through Ken Russell's interest in what was happening, pop art was about. There's a whole sequence where we all go to the wrestling match to watch tag wrestling. Well, that was funny because we didn't actually go to a wrestling match. I mean, you'd not know that if you see the film, because they sat us in a room and they got a purposely very small room and they sat us in there and we all had to smoke cigarettes. So it was cigarette fog.
I had a green card and moved to New York in 64, 65. And Peter was there at the same time on a very prestigious scholarship, the Harkness Fellowship.
It's called a Harkness Fellowship of the Commonwealth Fund. And they paid my expenses, my apartment, and I could do what I want. The only obligation I had was to travel by automobile that was rented for me.
And I remembered him ringing and saying, listen, I've got this car, for 2 months or 3 months, whatever it was. And, I was 26, my wife was 20. Peter was sort of 24 or 5, and his wife was, I think, 19.
So I went to all the Indian reservations and drove from New York all the way around the coast.
You realise how big the country is, because in my head, you know, I thought we'd gone from top to bottom, but in fact...
We did 36,000 miles.
36,000 miles.
I think in Texas I sat on a cop's motorbike with him. It was sort of fun. Everybody was very pleasant. Had long hair and they thought we were the Beatles or something in Texas, and that was sort of great too.
Now,
we didn't go all the way south because it was so hot, if you remember, right?
Yes, that's right, that's right.
It was too damn hot. And then got to California, and it was sort of weird because there was naked people lying in baths of red blood, sort of artwork then. And it was quite an experience. A lot of younger people, people from California, people from Belgium, people from all over the world were there in New York at that time.
For them, it was a very eye-opening experience. They were, you know, running in circles with other artists, whether it was the pop art movement or people within that scene. And I think a lot of that allowed them both an introspection into their own work, but I think as well it gave them a little bit of a taste of what it was like to be in that sort of art mecca that New York was at the time.
Well, there was a Roy Lichtenstein in my area, Randy Warhol, Tom Wesselman, James Rosenquist, Robert Morris around, there was Donald Judd around, there was Dan Flavin around, Robert Indiana was there. I think he was the first one who came to see Check Me Out, I don't know. It was a good time. They were open to a lot of new ideas then. It was just a time when things happened. I was there in the middle of it, in London and in New York. I don't know if I had one or two, no, I had two shows at Cornbury Gallery, which was sort of like where a lot of artists who Castelli didn't have room to show because he was pretty booked up with his pop art stuff. But there was an awful lot of people showing that too. I showed a one-man exhibition of paintings that I'd been doing in New York City. And everybody was just great and friendly. And it was no problem to go visit an artist's studio, which is not something that you would do in London. It was sort of like a pastime. Americans were more open in this respect than the English were. When I was living in England at Sidney Janis, who did an exhibition called The New Realists, I don't remember the actual dates, and that's where Warhol came out and where Lichtenstein and I think Rosenquist and a lot of Europeans were into. And I was in it as well, and Peter Blake from England, which was a great start.
Yeah, I think what people forget is that pop art did kind of disappear for a long time. You know, it had its moment and then it pretty much disappeared and became, I mean, unfashionable is the wrong word, but it just didn't exist really.
I think some of what you found over the last 60, 70 years is a desire, especially amongst young and established artists, to create something that pushes the boundaries. Whether it is, this invention of what was coined as pop art, but I think as well with something like hybrid, it was really kind of taking some of the technological advances of the time and being able to appropriate that into their work.
I was experimenting myself with work then. I worked with Gerald Lang, who's now passed away, who on public relations project.
They went out and they asked 137 different people. It was artists, collectors, curators, writers, and people within the art world, and asked them to design this sort of perfect tabletop sculpture. And by doing so, they built these beautiful kits that went along with it, with all different types of materials that they could use.
It was called Hybrid Enterprises, our little operation, and we went around interviewing people who tried to make a popular work of art. In 1965, I guess it was.
And as a result, they sort of fed all of this information into a computer and were able to extrapolate what then became their ideal tabletop sculpture.
I think in '66, I think we finished Hybrid and showed it. I mean, that was actually pretty successful from a publicity point of view, but it was not intentionally done for that. It just, I guess it was a piece of conceptual art that
suddenly was developing, then it was sort of fashionable, I guess. And so that was then, and then I went back to England, which I couldn't adjust to. It seemed so narrow. And financially it was hard because fellowship was over, so I had to earn a living.
It was just a quirk of fate, I suppose, that this young, thrusting, and important art dealer in Switzerland, Bruno Bischenberger, offered him a contract. And what seemed almost as though he'd just got off the plane and gone on again, moved to Zurich, and certainly changed his life.
I prefer the new ones, to be honest, but I guess you always change. It was one of the bigger paintings I ever did. That was 5 meters long. Must have been crazy.
I first met Peter, I think in the beginning of '76. It might have been late '75, early '76, when he was living in Zurich, and he and his wife Claude came to London and were renting a flat in Chelsea, and I went to interview him there, and he seemed rather surprised that someone was doing an MA thesis which included his early student work, which after all was less than 15 years earlier. So he seemed a bit perplexed that someone was asking him questions as if he were already part of art history.
Peter was very much an artist who was taking these everyday images from advertisements or articles or pin-up calendars and reappropriating them into his work. And you can see an incredible arc in daringness in the way that he approaches it. Initially starting out with a simple oil painting on a canvas, and then really honing the skill of the spray enamel and almost this sort of beautiful flatness, almost very much in an advertising sense.
At the early '60s, I was trying to get rid of the brushwork in painting. Or at least after I visited America, then I started using the airbrush and that sort of thing to eliminate any handmade stuff. Dee. Oh, we got a drip. Fun. We were there for the opening ceremony of the Olympics, and we were guests of the Olympic committee because we painted these, or designed these posters for the Olympics. And so it would tell you here, edition Olympia. There was somebody who did it, and we got the free passes and a big box to sit in and be like the kings.
I'd like to tell you a little story about my connection to Peter and his art. Most of my connection involves this, which is a painting called Artomatic Loop-de-Loop. In 1984, my band The Cars went to England to record an album that would be called Heartbeat City, and I discovered Peter Phillips. The imagery involved things that I was already interested in, so I picked out my favorite painting and arranged to meet Peter to beg, if I had to get to use it for the cover, and he said yes. Also, another point to make is that there's another rock and roll band called The Strokes, who admittedly have been influenced by The Cars, and they used one of his paintings on one of their covers. I never knew whether or not this inspired them to look at Peter's work or not, but we were thrilled to see that used too.
The work he'd made early on was shown in museums in the United States and Britain and around Europe very quickly. He was in demand very early on at a time when he was painting very few paintings a year. And I remember him telling me that he had so many letters requesting his participation in shows and so few paintings that he didn't even answer a lot of them because he couldn't work fast enough to keep up with the demand. I think that's always been a sign for me of Peter's integrity, that he couldn't speed up.
And here we got Her Majesty.
This is in the New York Times. So yeah, this was for the Tate opening, I think.
That was the Tate opening, yeah. Yeah, because...
And was this the same show that Princess Margaret came to?
No. Well, the Queen was opening the Tate Gallery because they just renovated or something. They spent time talking to me. you know, royalty did take an interest, but she took a great interest in the arts and probably supported them.
Looking at Peter's work, it changes very much with where he's located, the surroundings he's in, and his inspiration.
It was not always quite as straightforward as one thinks. A lot of it was automatic responses to variations of places that I lived in and saw. Well, then I bought an old farmhouse in Spain, in Mallorca, there was nothing on Mallorca when I did that. And I could work there. I had a space to work, and I found a gallery, and the Spanish seemed to like my work. An environment changes you a little bit, so the work changed again a little bit. It was more relaxed, more peaceful, so one could actually relax. And that's become more and more the thing, that I prefer nature than sort of hustling in the city to try and make commodity work for making money. But so one has to learn to live with less. I learned to live with less down there, although I actually had more in the long run. And I carried on working, you know, just down there in Spain.
But it was in Mallorca that I truly appreciated the kit that Peter worked with. Peter was one of the first people I know to get a computer and to start to use it creatively. There was a kind of a glowing respect for the ability to use a technology and not be dominated by it.
I was always a little bit scientifically inclined, so I liked the latest trendy gadgets.
Well, then you should learn how to type.
That's not trendy. It fascinated me because it's sort of like alien technology come to Earth.
You know, he said, "You want to see clouds?" He said, "There's a bank here of, you know, zillions of cloud formations and clouds and so on."
Well, I was doing the same stuff as I was doing painting, but it was just easier to sort of organize your perspective on them. As I was painting imagery, and you have to get your images, so you take photographs and you alter the photographs, and that's what computers can do very easily. You could do things that you couldn't normally do, so you combined a lot of different techniques, and I used to paint them. Yeah, I just work digitally, that's all, because there's constantly moving around. It's rather hard to lug big paintings around, so, and damned expensive, so I'm not particularly material orientated, so it's become very virtual. Computers are just another instrument that you use, another tool that you use.
I remember I spoke to him repeatedly about his choice of imagery, and he kept insisting, it's random, it doesn't mean anything, I'm not using it for any purpose, I'm not using particularly American images. And I would come back, well, why have you used this, you know, consistently in all these paintings? And finally, after about the 9th time, on maybe the 3rd day, which was, I suppose, torture technique worthy of Guantanamo, I finally realized what he was saying, and that he really meant what he said, and that this was just visual material that he had around him. And he wasn't using it intellectually, he wasn't using it sociologically, politically. It was stuff that he liked the look of, and that was enough. And he had an intuition about the imagery he was using. And afterwards, one can make connections and read into it, but at the time, probably for him, it was not a very conscious thing.
But it's still based on everyday things that I just put stuff together. I've said it 100 times. So the stuff is what I happen to be looking at, and if I find it interesting, then I might put it in. But still, I like complicated imagery, that's all. Ambiguous and complicated. Now, don't expect any explanation whatsoever. I have no explanations, and I don't like to explain my paintings anyway, because I don't know myself. It's just how it happens. Things happen. And you put them together and you think, that's all right. Using other types of imagery, sometimes sarcastic and sometimes real. Other times not so real, so I make a few jokes here and there which are hidden within the paintings. I took this in the winter when I was up there, when I could walk and ski, and so I made a humorous painting. The little dog is actually laughing. He's not a little dog, he's a bloody great big husky. No, there's sort of a little jokes every now and then, little sarcastic jokes. No, she's phoning the boss because the zebra's got out of the glass cage. I mean, you've got basic imageries. You've got this, which is the religion. You've got the pig sniffing on the thing, which is you can interpret it how you want. You've got all the bombs going off here, and you've got Ronald McDonald there. Well, it's one I started, and I don't know, it should have been larger, I think, but it's to do about the way the world is. Little girl is, or the little child is crying about the military feeding up their machine, which they're doing, putting bullets into this plane to go off and bomb some poor people. But then you have to look at the painting and see what it's about. I mean, that's up to the viewer to decide for himself. They can read the title, but you're not going to get any more clued up. You accept it as a painting. And people read things in different ways, don't they? It's hard for me to push out the way you have to look at it, because then it's mundane again. It becomes normal. You know, I'm not pushing my view on, and I'm making some sort of remarks visually, which can be interpreted any way you want to, if you want to. But most people do. They spend hours in front of a painting, hardly. Not these days. They brush through and say, "Who's that? What's that name? Do I know him? Oh, is he famous? Yes, okay." We look a bit harder. That's the way it goes. That's my work for today.
I think there's always a gentle pressure or more or less overt on artists to repeat past successes or produce what the market wants. And I think the artists that I've wanted to work with and written about and done retrospectives with are the ones that I felt were working with integrity and making the art that they wanted to make, not just what the market asked them for. But you can't even know yourself as an artist if you're being subtly influenced by those pressures.
I didn't have the same obligations that the American artists seem to have of doing one thing and carrying it on for the rest of their lives, more or less.
He didn't want to stay in the same course. He didn't want to just continue to rehash the same concepts over and over again.
Because I've had enough of stars and pin-up girls that sort of wore itself out. If you keep on painting the same things the rest of your life, you're a dummy, aren't you? You get no life experience yourself. If you're a photographer, you keep on photographing bees or plants or something, you get really tired of it.
But there is this underlying aesthetic. There are these icons and images that keep sort of resurfacing within his work. And I think pop art sort of examines a very wide concept, but that element of pop sort of continues that narrative through his work, even when it gets into abstract work. And I think what's been brilliant about his career is that he's gone with his gut rather than what everyone tells him to do, and that's been evident throughout his entire career and where he's traveled to, where he's decided to live.
Probably his legacy is just going to be one of a true artist. He always did work for the work. It wasn't to make money. It wasn't to be a celebrity. He always loved creating art. Whether it was collages, paintings, sculptures, drawings, prints, whatever the mood and whatever inspired him and whatever he felt like doing, he just did.
Peter's legacy is still yet to be untold. He's had such an amazing practice over the years.
Because I met him in the mid-70s and saw the new work as it was being made, I'm very fond of the work he made later as well, especially from the late 70s onwards, when they became much more hand-painted again, where he's working with small brushes and almost like an old master technique. And I think he's one of the artists who's really evolved and made some of his strongest work later on. I mean, I think the work he's made since the mid-90s has been some of his best, and that's not true of many of the artists of his generation.
Even at 79 years old, he's still creating art, whether it's in his office on the Wacom tablet digitally, whether it's working with printers, creating some new print editions. We're actually working on a new sculpture series that he wants to do with a foundry here in Brisbane.
I mean, I do what I do, and I have no bad thoughts about it. Other than it's quite difficult to talk about because talking is not painting. My advice to anybody who might be listening to this is just do what you want to do. Be who you are. Doesn't matter what anybody else says. But do it well as you can.
Happy birthday, Peter Phillips. And I'm sure you'll have many more productive years, and everybody is waiting to see what you're going to produce.
Hi, Peter. Happy birthday. Good to see you. We'd love to see you. So next time you come, let me know. Let me know next time you're in London. You're like me. You'll survive. See you later.
Happy birthday, Peter. An amazing milestone of 80 years old. Many congratulations, and I really hope to celebrate with you in person.
So, happy birthday, Peter.